This has been a challenging month to watch the news and to pay attention to the world around us. From the impact of climate change resulting in more frequent, more powerful, and more unusual hurricanes, to political discourse that includes accusations that whoever is on the other side is dangerous for the country. We're living in a frightening time in the United States. The divisions have grown sharp. It takes very little effort to find liberals and conservatives attacking each other online and even in person. How many of you have friends or relatives with whom you never talk politics? Me too. Pick one news article in the politics section and you can find conservatives accusing liberals of being blind and lazy, and liberals accusing conservatives of being heartless or stupid. According to the Seattle Times, beginning in the 2016 campaign cycle, the National Institute for Civil Discourse has received requests for conflict mediation from rabbis, pastors whose congregations are at each other's throats, Fortune 500 companies where productivity is down because employees bicker about politics, and a mother in New England who feared her family's holiday would be ruined because her two daughters were returning from college and they hadn't spoken to one another since the election. The director says, "This is now deep in our homes, deep in our neighborhoods, deep in our places of worship, and deep in our workplaces." She says it really is a virus. If we were to view these issues on a single line from conservative to liberal, my sister is on the opposite end of the political and nearly the opposite end of the religious spectrum from me. And at the same time, she is deeply compassionate, creative, and intelligent. She's fiercely thoughtful and highly opinionated. She is my sister. We're on different sides of many things. And yet when I asked her if I might share something she said about a recent shooting, she refused to give me permission, concerned that if I told you some of her ideas, you would despise her. That surprised me. Why would she be afraid of being despised? Because she expects certain things from Unitarian Universalists, certain things about our views of the world. She knows me as a liberal, and while I don't despise her, she worries that others she considers liberals would. Even in 2016, it had gotten to the point where it could destroy a career to shake a hand. Some of you probably remember when Governor Chris Christie shook President Obama's hand and praised his help after Hurricane Sandy. He received sharp criticism from other Republicans because he would choose to be civil. But it wasn't always like this. The divide has grown over the last 20 years. A Pew Research study done in 2012 reported that over the last 14 years before that, so from 98 to 2012, Republicans had gone from 42% who identified as strongly partisan to 65% who identified as strongly partisan. Democrats had a similar shift with 45% strongly partisan to 62% strongly partisan. Jonathan Haidt, author of The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, suggests that there are real differences in moral understandings and perspectives between liberals and conservatives. He chastises liberals who think that conservatives are blind or have been tricked. If people are voting Republican, he says, they must be voting for something. The first thing Haidt points out in his book suggests that perhaps Unitarians have been wrong all along. Our Unitarian ancestors believed in one God, finding their logic and reasoning could not support the idea of a Trinity. The Unitarian half of our tradition is founded on the idea that reason is one of the most important gifts that we have to apply to our lives. The Unitarians applied reason to their faith and encouraged everyone to apply reason first. But Jonathan Haidt suggests that as human, even as you use, we decide our perspective based on intuition and then develop a rationale for our choices. So our first response, our first way of making a decision is instinctive. And then we back it up with rational thinking. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we can acknowledge that we've all taken this route at times. We can fall victim to what psychologists call confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and even remember information that confirms what we already thought was true, and to ignore or dismiss information that challenges our beliefs. It ends up being stronger for emotionally charged or deeply held beliefs. Western philosophy was founded on the idea that there are two sides to our mind, reason and emotion. The gods represented perfect rationality, and it was up to humankind to control their passion, their emotions, in order to stop the cycle of rebirth. If man failed to control his passions, he would be reborn a woman. I have opinions about that, but we'll move on. But perhaps those early philosophers did not understand how connected emotion and reason are for people of any gender. Later philosophers, such as David Hume, would say that reason is the servant of emotion, not the other way around. Reason is like the president's press secretary. Reason's job is to justify policy, you've all seen it, not decide it. And our gut instincts, our seemingly irrational intuitions, are not completely separate from reason. In fact, as Malcolm Gladwell points out in his book, Blink, who's read that? One of you. Good, then you won't know if I'm telling the truth. I am. Our instincts are often based on complex, lightning-fast, rational processes that we aren't consciously aware of. So where does all this leave us when it comes to political conversations? One of the tools we need is to understand the moral foundations of our decisions and the ways this view can bring us together and also blind us to other people's perspectives. Haidt offers this illustration. Suppose that two American friends are traveling together in Italy. They go to see Michelangelo's David, and when they finally come face to face with the statue, they both freeze, dead in their tracks. The first guy, we'll call him Adam, is transfixed by the beauty of the perfect human form. The second guy, we'll call him Bill, is transfixed by embarrassment, staring at that thing in the center. So here's my question for you. Which one of these two guys is more likely to have voted Republican or Democrat? I won't actually ask you to answer that because we tend to share the same stereotypes. This points out an important difference between liberals and conservatives. It's a personality trait called openness to experience. So sit with that for a second. Openness to experience. Do you identify with that? Does it feel like something to be desired to you? Keep in mind that personality psychologists would say there's nothing inherently good or bad about this trait. It's simply a way that humans differ. People that identify with it tend to think it is good. But personality traits can influence our decisions in life. Conservatives tend to prefer more traditional societies without so much change. The need for change leads liberals to feel discomfort with some moral viewpoints that are important to the foundation of a cohesive society. and focuses liberal moral decision-making in 2 or 3 moral areas, while conservatives tend to balance all of the moral foundations when making decisions. Jonathan explains this by describing our 6 moral taste buds. These are the values around which we center our morality. We all share the values, but conservatives and liberals weigh them differently and put their priorities in different areas when they make decisions and judgments. So I'll tell you the areas, and we'll focus in on just a few in the interest of time. The first moral foundation is harm and care. We are bound together as mammals, and we have a strong ability to care, to feel compassion for one another, and especially those who are vulnerable. The second foundation is about fairness and cheating. This is something we find more in humans than other animals, although some animals do show a tendency to cheat. But especially as humans, we tend to want to punish those who are not doing their part. We want the world to be fair. However, conservatives and liberals look at what that means in different ways. Liberals tend to look at equality as fairness. No one should have more than everyone else, especially when people are suffering. They connect this strongly back to the harm and care, our first taste bud. Conservatives tend to focus on proportionality. Did the 1% work harder? Did they do things others valued? Did they generate something? Why do you want to punish success? So the third taste bud is in-group and loyalty. Humans come together in groups, larger and more complex than any you'll find in the animal kingdom. Although we form a tribal psychology that allows us to fight and to compete with other groups. The fourth is authority and respect. In the animal kingdom, we see this as a response to power. The alpha male is treated with respect. Despite popular mythology, however, research shows that the concept of alpha male doesn't really translate to human societies. Authority in humans is based more on voluntary difference and even elements of love. This is near and dear to Unitarian Universalists. We tend to reject authority in its many forms, so much so that there are UUs who say that the UU sacraments are doubt, argument, and voting. Another way to look at this is when it comes to the flag. So Jonathan Haidt, writing a few years back, he wrote this book, pointed out that at the Occupy Wall Street protests, there were a lot of American flags with things written on them. Protesters used the flag to send their own message without respect for flag traditions that would prohibit this. At Tea Party rallies, you would see a lot of flags, but nobody wrote anything on them. So the fifth moral taste bud is about purity and sanctity. Both the conservatives and liberals have purity views, but the political right tends to moralize sex, especially female sexuality, much more than the left. Putting limits on how women can manage their bodies is designed to support the purity value. The political left focuses on purity with food, language, and even sometimes places where we shop or what we drive. For the left, how we relate to food in particular is becoming very moralized. The sixth taste bud is liberty and oppression. This is a basic desire to be freed from oppression, and it's actually valued by both sides of the political spectrum, although the left and right swap in different oppressors. So the political left has different ideas on who the oppressors are than the right does. So what might this look like in our lives? Haidt tells us that in one recent study, we asked people to suppose you're about to get a dog. You pick a particular breed, and you learn some new information about this breed. So suppose you learn that this particular breed is independent-minded and relates to his owner as a friend and an equal. Sound good to some of you? Yeah. Well, if you're liberal, you say, hey, that's great, because liberals like to say fetch, please. But if you're a conservative, that's not so attractive. If you're conservative, you learn that a dog's extremely loyal to its home and family. It doesn't warm up quickly to strangers. For conservatives, loyalty is good. Dogs should be loyal. But to a liberal, it sounds like the dog is running for a Republican office. So if you have such different moral focuses, how can we ever talk to one another? Because that's really what we're trying to figure out these days. The first step is understanding that often at the root, what we want is very similar. Virginia, my wife, thank you for being here today, is a former congregation-based community organizer. She explains one of the basic principles of community organizing is to get people together to identify common problems that they might want to work on together. The challenge is getting people to first focus on shared problems, not the solutions they prefer. So often we end up focusing on different solutions to the problem and end up fighting even when we agree on the problem itself. For example, a problem is not that we need more buses. A problem is that I can't get to work. We have to temporarily let go of our preferred solution, more buses, and first come together around the problem, getting to work. Getting people to identify common problems allows them to work together creatively for solutions that might meet everybody's needs. So how do we make progress when the need grows more and more urgent and the possibility seems further and further away? Haidt suggests one important political change might be to change the schedule of Congress. It used to be that they had 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So families would often move to DC together and they would make friendships across party lines. This changed with Newt Gingrich, and it's at that point that we've seen the rancor in Congress and throughout the nation start to escalate. The families stopped socializing with one another, and so the politicians stopped being able to talk to one another. The polarization is getting worse and harder to overcome. We're sorting ourselves into groups aided by a variety of media outlets, including social media, where we filter what we see through our friends. Our churches tend to be split along ideological lines, and increasingly people are moving to places where they can be with people they consider like-minded. And within our groups, we've been silencing those who disagree, those who want to be more moderate or hold a different opinion that doesn't fit within our conservative, moderate, liberal structure, often struggle to be heard. This happens even in our congregations. Group loyalty urges us to want to speak with one voice. Can you think of ways that plays out for Unitarian Universalists? Yes, no? Some of you. We acknowledge that we tend strongly toward a liberal perspective, so much so that there are those who say you can tell it's a Unitarian church just by counting the number of Priuses in the parking lot. We like belonging to groups, be it through evolution or design. So what happens when you don't quite fit, when you don't believe everything the group wants you to believe? Do we have spaces in our church and our lives for variations on a theme? Scientific American reports that a recent study showed that liberals and conservatives are increasingly unwilling to live near each other, be friends with each other, get married to each other. Social media, as I mentioned, is increasing our ability to respond quickly to the news of the day, but it decreases our exposure to other ideas and the people that hold them. It decreases our ability to have relationships with people with different ideas. The impact of sharply decreased social contact with people who hold a different perspective is that we're able to forget that people on the other end of the spectrum are also people of inherent worth and dignity. We forget these are people who are facing similar problems and concerns, who want to raise their children well, get to work, have a happy life. Haidt says, nowadays when the fiscal and political situations are so much worse, many Americans feel that they're on a ship that's sinking, and the crew is too busy fighting with each other to bother plugging the leaks. I'm feeling that. We have to find ways to reestablish connections between people, particularly in Congress. Members of Congress need to start socializing again. We need to find ways to restrict faceless corporate involvement in voting. We need to find ways to talk about problems that we share so that we can find solutions together. Finding ways past our differences will allow us to unite, to oppose hate and fear that has found its way so heavily into the political landscape. So, in this time of hate and fear, what can we do? First, take care of yourself in the way that you need to. If you need to put limits on who you talk to or what you talk to your friends about, do it. If you need to take a break from the news, do so. My wife and I have a Friday news Sabbath every week, and I can't tell you how much that's reduced my stress level. It's true. She has to remind me sometimes because I often check CNN as soon as I wake up. But do stay engaged with people as much as you can, even with those who worship differently, live differently, vote differently. Look for the common values and the common struggles we face. Don't get too stuck in debating your preferred solutions before you first really connect with one another about your shared problems. The struggles about money, family, needs, fears, and more. My beloved spiritual companions, when it is hard to have hope, remember, we Unitarian Universalists have a lot of practice journeying through life with those who have different ways of seeing the world. We can use that practice to talk to people outside of these walls. We can use the tools we have developed and will continue to develop to listen to people, to understand our common problems, and to begin to build bridges and break down walls. May it be so. Amen.